Hi, and I'm doing a tutorial about how to achieve this painterly style in Blender using Eevee. And this version is 2.93, I think. And it's first time doing tutorials, and I'm kind of nervous. So, anyway, so here's basically the final result. Let's zoom into camera view because I enabled camera calling, and it's gonna look weird if. So you see, it's like a 3D scene, but rendered kind of like a painting, and it's entirely interactable. Well, I wouldn't call it interactive, but like just it can be animated. And here's the looked at viewport. Oh, that's just due to the camera calling. I can just disable it, and we do that too. So here's looking at the mesh, and here's this Suzanne, and if we disable the geometry node that's on it, you can see that's just a normal Suzanne. I don't know why the X-ray's on, but yeah. And there's just a plane with a geometry node that basically distributes those brush strokes as planes. And so that's how you achieve this look in general. And here are those brush strokes. And I use 3 colors in the scene, just like blue, red, and green, but with some color variation built in the material. And I guess just how to build this kind of style from scratch. So the first thing, let's disable everything. And make the brushstroke first. And let's make a plane. That looks good. Scale it on the y-axis a little bit. Oh, x-axis. And this will be our brushstroke. And let's create a material for it. So, and the first thing, go to look dev, center it. So for the brushstroke, basically I'm using an image of the brushstroke, and I could do it procedurally, but there's really no need to. So I have one brushstroke already. It's showing it as this, but if I plug in the alpha and the color, you can see it's basically a brushstroke that I could show you the picture actually. So where is it? Here. So here is the PNG, and it kind of looks like this. You can make it like download it from Google, or you can just paint a brush in Photoshop or Procreate or anything. And remember to save the alpha and as PNG. So yeah, if I use alpha, you can see like it's kind of like a squeezed brushstroke. And we are using this for the brushstroke. So since we're using alpha, and we kind of have to change the material setting and change the blend mode to alpha blend. And you can see there's a brushstroke and shadow mode. I'll get into those later, but let's first create this brushstroke and make it look good. So as you see, the color is kind of weird because it's painted with the same color, and the only thing changes across this thing is actually the alpha. So we are not going to use a color, but just to create a color. So we can do this, choose whatever color we want here. This is just a placeholder. But to actually make the color, we can use a mix RGB node and plug in. Or wait, sorry. Actually, I use a color ramp. But for now, like we can just use a simple color like that. And you can see the color, and for an actual painting, there's actually color variations in there. So let's create some noise to go with it. So let's go noise texture. Let's move those over here. And I want to use a UV space, which is the texture coordinate. Use the UV and change that to 2D because we don't need 3D. Doesn't really matter though. So we can tap. Basically we use the we multiply it by a different color. Let's say we want to keep this color. We're just going to sample this color, keep the color the same. And we use a factor in the mixing factor. This one, if it's just like a white picture, you can see that there's color variation here. If we add a mapping node, change this to texture. I mean, just reverse from the point, but not exactly reversed. But so if you could change it on the, oh, actually it's Y probably. Y-axis, you can see it kind of goes along the brushstroke. And increase the scale a little bit. But they kind of look a little bit too uniformly distributed. So we can actually add a Voronoi, use the distance actually, and decrease the scale a little bit. I'll actually use color for vector because that's 3D. And yeah, that's a bit more like the actual brushstroke. And you can see there's actually some detail in the alpha that we're not captured. So in order to mix up as a color, we can use the color ramp. Oh, yeah, we can also add it to the alpha too. I'm just gonna squeeze it a little bit so the edges are more defined. Duplicate this, plug the alpha in, and let's mix these two with a multiply. Oh, use the color, change it to multiply, and here. So the color is kind of changed along this as well, based on the alpha. So it's also like how the brushstroke is shaped, which makes it looks a bit better. So for this, let's say the color, if we want to create something, let's see. Actually, let's use a color ramp here instead of a single mix RGB. And the reason is that, let's say if we change this to the color we want, you can see we have a color. We change it to a secondary color. It doesn't have to be pink. We can change it to this, right? And the thing is about a painting is that you're kind of mixing color when you're painting it. So when actually a paintbrush is struck down, the color is not uniformly distributed. Like the kind of, there's still like paint that's not mixed well. So there's actually hue changes in the color too. So to kind of mimic that effect, I'm going to change it to HSV, which means we can ask access to the hue value here. And I'm gonna create a new one. And this middle one is actually gonna be the primary color we're gonna use. Let's say if you're gonna create greenish, let's do yellow this time. Yeah, yellowish. And I want it to be somewhat dark, like around here. Decrease the value a bit, like a dirt color. And here I just want it to be so HSV and you change it to near, which means that it's gonna go along the color wheel to find the nearest path to it. And that's why I think we're gonna keep this one on the left. So around here, and this one on the right side of it. I want it to be less saturated but brighter. And this one as well, less saturated but brighter. Oh, let's see how that looks. That looks terrible. Oh yeah, let's try making it a bit less saturated but more value, or keep the middle one. Oh, yeah, so the middle one should be higher value. The other two should be lower value, like in brightness. And also less saturated, because like you're mixing the color and these shouldn't be too prominent. And there's some issue is that basically the primary color is showing too little here because of the multiply result is not mapped correctly, or just like it's not mapped in desired range. To change that, I could use the either a color ramp to change the value, but I like to use brightness contrast. So we can squeeze down the contrast a little bit to make the color more, uniform, and increase the brightness, gonna squeeze it towards this direction. Decrease it, it's gonna squeeze it towards the lower end of the color ramp. This actually looks pretty good. And I'm move it a little bit to the left because I decrease the brightness a bit. It's still gonna lower the contrast to make it just a little bit not uniform. Has some variation there. This looks quite good, I think. Okay, we're just gonna leave it like that. And yeah. Oh, enable this. I think this could be scaled a bit more. I think it's along the y-axis. Look at that. So this looks like a brush stroke. You could also use this value for the normal to add like some bump. So we use a bump node, connect it to normal. Use this value. Actually, let's duplicate the color ramp again. Oh wait. Wait. I think I scaled it in the wrong direction. Yeah, this is more like it. So here I'm just gonna change this from Y to X. But you can see like the edges, this is more smeared. I'm more like a stroke. I think this is correctly mapped. Cool. And use the color as height. Pretty simple. Decrease the strength quite a bit. Okay. So we got ourselves a brushstroke. And go back to layout. Okay. Oh, this is not. Yeah, this is it. Actually, just merge this. Cool. And look at I'm going to move this away because it's just going to be instanced by the geometry node. And let's create a geometry that we're going to render. What are we going to do? Let's try not a circle. Let's try a UV sphere. Let's shade it smooth, look better, and instance those strokes through a geometry node. So let's go to Geometry Node Setup. So pretty simply, just like to instance stuff, let's just randomly distribute point across the sphere. Point distribute. Wait, where is this? Oh yeah. So you see this, you distribute some points along it, and then you instance them as the brushstroke. And the object, let's choose the here. That looks pretty weird because I haven't applied the scale to the brushstroke, so it's got instancing it with the original scale. So let's apply the scale, and that looks pretty good. In fact, let's increase the sphere a little bit. Let's just see the sphere. Enable the gizmo and apply the scale again. Because if not, it's gonna instance the stroke as also scaled, which is not what we want. So we got the sphere. Let's change it to Poisson disk because we want it to be kind of uniformly distributed, and increase the density quite a bit. So yeah, let's just save that for now. Cool. And the next thing we said, we want some randomness or some fuzziness to the sphere, because usually when we're doing painting, we actually paint outside the outline of stuff because its brush is huge. It looks messy, but also more stylized. So let's rotate the brushstroke a bit because like we don't paint every stroke along the same direction. So let's so we distribute the point and we add some noise to the notation. To do that, we can use the attribute or point rotate actually. And we use, let's just say attribute randomize. Attribute, let's call it rand. And rotate, use the vector. Set 0.1, 0 to 1. Change it to -1 to 1. Rotate along a attribute, use rand. See, it looks kind of weird because it's too much. Let's use another attribute. Let's use attribute vector mesh. Oh, this is not. Yeah, this is not. Okay, attribute vector mesh. Let's use rand. And here is also rand. And we try to scale it down using a float. So it's 0, and we rotate it a little bit, like to make it more fuzzy, I guess. This is great, but also I kind of want the noise to be, so this random noise is basically a white noise, so it's not continuous, so it's completely random. But when you are painting, I kind of expect to paint somewhat, so one brushstroke is kind of along the next brushstroke. So they're kind of continuous along a direction, but not exactly samely aligned, like aligned in the same direction. So instead of using random, actually I think it's better to sample from a cloud texture. So there should be an attribute sample texture. And let's create a new texture, texture point 001, and here. And we are using, so the mapping of it, we can use the position of the point. So in this way, the points that are close together can have the similar rotation because the noise texture is kind of continuous. So the result, let's do, the result is rend, and we remove that. So right now the texture is 0 because like there's no rotation because the texture is completely black. So we use here. Wait. Oh, yeah, it's not an image, but we use cloud. And you can see like these points rotation is kind of so these parts are rotated the same way, these parts are rotated the same way, but they're not exactly all the same. So see, this side has basically no rotation, this has some rotation, and we just have to increase the scale or decrease the scale of this, which is decrease the size. Wait, hard, soft, grayscale. Oh, and also, since this rend, you can see here is a color. If it's black and white, all the 3 axes is going to be the same. So we change it from grayscale to color. There's for the RGB, basically XYZ is mapped to the RGB, and you don't want them to all be the same. And yeah, and the thing is, you can see them, they all sort of distribute around the same center, which is because like this rand is actually randomly between 0 and 1. And we are actually going to remap it towards basically -1 to 1, or something that's like can be minus value, or it's all going to rotate toward the same direction. So we use the still vector mass. You could use remap, but since it's a vector, it's easier just to do subtract vector, change rend, still rend. We just -0.5 to it. And therefore it's basically from 0 to 1 to -0.5 to 0.5. And let's see. Next thing to do is basically there's 2 liter rotation because it's basically -0.5 to 0.5. We can scale it up just by duplicating this. Use scale. Now it's working. And we want to plug that as an input. So we can change the name of it to rotation. Change the amount of rotation it has. But I don't know if this is using a sphere, but the rotation works perfectly fine right now. But I don't know if it's gonna work fine on other geometry. Let's try something else. Because when I'm doing the torus, there's some issue with the rotation kind of not aligned with the geometry. So let's apply the same geometry node. Wait, where is it? Here. I think this is the one we just created. And we scale it up, apply scale. Move it along y-axis a little bit. So we see it's kind of working, but there are some like really extreme ones that are sticking out. And the way we change that is by not using the point rotate, but also using a different one called the rotate, along rotation to vector. So the vector, we wanted to align it. So basically want it to not go too far from its original face that it's facing. So we use the vector as an attribute and we type in normal. And don't worry, we can change it to z. So it's mapping the z-axis of the brushstroke to the normal, which means all the brushstroke is like facing the normal, or just like the normal of so basically the brushstroke, the z-axis is pointing upwards, and normal is pointing outwards. So it aligns and it's fine. And this way we can change. So here, if we change rotation amount, you can see that it's only rotating relative to the normal. But we don't really want that to happen all the time. But it's really simple to adjust it. So we can just decrease the factor a little bit so it could become fuzzy again. And I actually would like to keep that also as an input. So this is the along normal. Let's just call it that. So here's our rotation amount, or just like scaling of the rotation and how aligned along the normal it is. So here. Let's keep working with a cube, with a sphere actually. Yeah, I think that's enough fuzziness I want. Cool. And other than that, let's actually try to be able to change the scale of the brushstroke a little bit, because it's always going to be the same scale when you see if the geometry you're basically instancing it is huge. Let's see if I scale this up and apply the scale. Then you can see there's going to be holes in there because like the stroke is not getting bigger and the density is not increasing, but they need to cover more ground. So actually let's try to change the scale, which is just pretty simple, point scale. And there's a factor for it. Just to keep it uniform, we can use combine x, y, z. And we plug it all to the same one. So it's going to generate a vector of that. It's all like the same. And the result as result as scale. And we change it to scale. Why is this? Oh, we should add it before the instance, of course. So here, wait, it's disappearing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it's okay. Yeah, we are using an attribute, not this one. So we connect this to this. Actually, when using the name scale, it actually just scale it. You don't even need this because the scale is basically the name designated for the scale of the stuff. So we can scale stuff up and down. But also we kind of wish there's more variation in basically the scale of it. And we can use the random that we sampled from the noise texture again, but also that would just make the rotation somewhat linked to the scale of the stuff which we don't really want. We can just add a new attribute randomize. Attribute, let's call it ren2. Oh, it should be a vector. Rend, it's called rend s. And here we actually, let's not create a vector. Let's just create a float. So the brushstroke gonna be uniformly scaled, which is actually kind of not really what we want, but it should be fine. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect look that much. And also you don't want extremely slender strokes or extremely broad strokes. And when you're painting the same stuff, you're kind of using the same brush over and over again. So the brush stroke should approximately looks the same. So let's call it to random rand f, so random float. It's gonna be min at max. And with that, I could scale that scale vector with the random we just got. So scale, use randf, rand_s, okay. So basically randomize the scale of it. I don't think you can see it very clearly, but if we change the density to 0.1, so we can see it better. There should be someone that's smaller, some that's bigger. You see, there's some randomization going on there. So let's say we're gonna keep that to 0.5 and 1. So the smallest it gets is still like half the size. And I think that looks kind of good in that sense. And we can actually just put those two as input as well. So change the name, scale mean and scale max, and change that to somewhat like global scale or something, to remind ourselves that's basically how everything's gonna be scaled, but this one only changes the biggest one, this one changes the smallest one. So 0.5, oh, 0.5, and 0.1, oh, just 1. And let's make the density also input, so we can change it in the viewport, and also the distance min and max. So let's increase the density. That looks pretty good. And decrease the distance a bit and fill up the hole. Cool. And add more rotation to it. More fuzzy. Cool. That looks like a cool sphere. And if we switch to shaded view, here's it looks kind of weird, which should be solved by changing the material setting. So we change to plane, GY, move it out. So that's the stroke we're instancing. It's a huge sphere. You see, basically one brush stroke is creating shadow for another, which is what we don't want. So we click on this one, shadow mode, click to none. And it looks pretty good. But there's another thing, which is that the sphere is pretty perfect as a geometry. If we scale it down, Let's see the torus. We change the geometry node. If we increase the density, there are gonna be brushstroke that's overlapping. And basically they are sort of sticking into each other, and it's pretty obvious sometimes around here and stuff. So there is a weird thing that you could do. So we change it to plane. Oh yeah. Oh, it is already using it. Okay. So basically, if I disable this, because of the alpha blend, it's gonna create these basically the alpha blend is just trying to show the back face of the transparent texture. In this case, the back face is same as the front face, so light should actually go through it. But in Eevee, when you're not showing the back face, it is actually just somewhat creating this weird look, and you have to enable this. And you can also just enable the back face culling, because sometimes there's going to be geometry that's sticking out quite a bit. That's usually the back face. And also they don't get the light quite good as well, because when you're seeing from the front, the back face you're seeing is actually getting the wrong lighting condition. Or just like the back face, you're not supposed to paint on the painting. And when you're able to see it, it's not aligning with the correct stuff, because like it's basically on the other side of geometry, so lighting, it's definitely wrong. And you can see it adds some specular to it, but it's pretty inconsistent. And I just like to disable that. And we can see there is some specular going on the sphere, and it's basically due to what we do in the shading. So if you go back to, I think it's 0.5, no, which one that is? Actually, let's. Oh, it's 0.4. Okay. So if you back here, we can actually change it to shaded mode. So we are only using the color and the alpha and some normal. So we can actually change how stuff look. So we can increase the metallic, and so if you want to paint something metallic, it's actually here. And decrease specular, increase specular, roughness. This all could be changed, but I would recommend keeping the roughness somewhere high. And if you want to make it look like you painted something metallic, just increase the metallic of here. And specular if you want highlights and stuff. So basically you want it to mimic the stuff that's being painted with a little bit more roughness and somewhat exaggerated specular, because it's not showing up really well, that well. So we just want it to be a somewhat reflective sphere. So here I have it. And actually, I'll show you some of the render setting as well. So let's enable this again. Let's use the, actually not the Suzanne. Let's use the torus and the cone that I used for the first render. Oh, and also the tree trunk. So you can see for shadow, if I disable all the cones, there are shadows here, right? But if I enable the sphere and disable the, oh, we need a plane. And we get rid of the cone. There's no shadow here. And the reason is that we already set the brushstroke to not cast shadow. So in order for it to have shadow, I actually altered the geometry node a little bit, basically by keeping the original geometry using a join geometry node here. And so this way we're keeping the original geometry, and the original geometry of this, oh, it's already assigning. Wait. What am I selecting the sphere? Yeah, I am selecting the sphere. So the original geometry is using this material, which is still not cast shadow. We can actually add a transparent material to it, so it's not showing up in the render. But you can just alpha clip and set it to 1, so it's totally transparent. Because if you only show the this geometry, see, there's nothing there. But there's a shadow there. The reason is that we actually change the shadow mode to opaque, and here's how you have the shadow. And you just assign everything that is instancing those strokes, the transparent, but make the stroke not cast shadow, then that's it. And yeah, that's basically how you create this effect in Blender. And actually, there's something else I want to, oh yeah, color variation. So here, let's go back to look depth. So all the brushstroke actually looks the same color, right? But you can see even the plane has somewhat like a noisy color. And it's just, let's go back to shading. And let's see where this is. Let's disable the plane. Let's just go back to, this is a brushstroke I use for the sphere. So basically add the random, no, I think it's geometry. So in geometry input, there is one called random per island, basically, or it's an object info. Yeah, it's object info. There's a random. So basically for each instance, you can get a random number here. And yeah, let's say, where should I plug this to? Basically, you get a random number from 0 to 1, and you can add it. So you first map it to 0.5 to, so minus 0.5 to 0.5, right? So therefore, it's not only gonna push all the color into one direction, it's gonna push it, basically kind of swing it back and forth. So from 0 to 1 to actually minus 1 to 1. And you can actually use a math node to add it before you go into this color ramp, or before you go to brightness contrast, because therefore this one can control like how the entire thing is. Yeah, so you see there's like color variation here, but also this might be too strong, so you could use another, I'm sorry, this is terrible node organization, but it's not add, it's multiply. And you can change the factor to this, to something quite low. So it's not affecting it as much. Go back to look depth. Let's see, I think this is enough. Oh, that's exactly 0.5, okay. So you see there's some color variation right here. And that looks more or less like a painting, I would say, than before, 0.4 maybe. And yeah, that's how you shade or not really shade, but just to create a painterly style. And there might be too much strength in the bump. I'm gonna decrease it. Yeah, that looks good. Cool. And you can play with the geometry node. Like you can basically lower the global scale. Let's say maybe 0.2 if you want it to be super detailed, and you kind of have to decrease the distance, minimum distance for scattering, and increase the density quite a bit, like here. And what I found like works with Brushstroke is that you make the align lot normal a bit more, because you're using finer strokes, so it's gonna be less what's it called? Fluffy. Cool. But you can also use like pretty big strokes, like 1.8, and you have to decrease this quite a bit, increase minimum distance until you see cavities and stuff. And for this, you really want it to be fluffy. So yeah. And let's see. Okay. Some final thoughts on this. It's because it's already quite long, this video. I'm probably gonna cut some stuff, but the performance is quite poor. So as you see, while I'm doing stuff in the shading viewport, every change I make on the material is gonna require quite a while to update. That's because there's a lot of geometries being instanced. So if you go into geometry node to instances, you see there's like 1,000, 1,500 plane that's being instanced. They all have each alpha and everything. Takes quite a while to render for the CPU to process, I guess. And another thing is like the true normal versus cost of normal. The meaning is that I think that the normal that we're using here to align it and also to distribute the point, basically the normal of the point is the true normal of the surface. So if you shade this flat, oh, it's not going to change everything. Okay, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just so it's using the true normal of the geometry, which means where you're doing something like low poly, it's gonna like, so let's bring out the Sylv here. So there's gonna have like pretty clunky geometry. So it's gonna be quite harsh around edges, which is actually what you want, because this style kind of blurs edge quite a bit. So this harsh edges kind of helps. But I'm just saying if you use shade smooth, it's not gonna do anything, because it's using basically the point or the raw geometry and using the true normal of the surface rather than the shade smooth, which is like another custom normal. And suggest some parameter optimization. So in order to use the lowest amount of geometry as possible, basically for the performance, the way you play with this is like every time you adjust the scale, you kind of want to adjust the density. So first you want to know something like a desirable scale of your brushstroke, and after you make sure you want like know what the scale is, you kind of first pump the density to something really high, and then you gradually increase the distance minimum until there's cavity. So you make it a bit less, and then you decrease the density down until there's cavity, and you increase a bit less, so there's basically no hole in the painting. And that kind of gives the lowest amount of instances you need to fill the entire geometry. Because like basically you're using the maximum distance minimum for it to cover the entire thing. And basically in that way, every points are distributed really like it's a similar distance between them, which is the distance minimum. Then you're using the minimum amount of points to cover the entire sphere without like leaving any blank. What else? Okay, changing the stroke direction. So everything I tested works kind of fine. So the brushstroke kind of align the tangent, which is what I guessed here, but there's not really a tangent input in geometry node. But I think it is using a tangent, or at least the generated tangent, because when I'm added to UV, when I rotate the UV map, it doesn't really do anything. So there's currently no way to change how this thing is aligned. I mean, you could rotate the brushstroke, but basically along the entire thing, it's kind of along the same direction. That's predetermined by the geometry. And there's really no way for you to optimize that unless there's a tangent input in the geometry node, which is we don't have right now. And I don't see maybe in 3.0, but I don't see it being added to a list that's the features being worked as they're working on. So I don't know when that's going to be added. And if there are a tangent node, basically have a custom UV that dictates the direction of those brushstrokes, which would be really nice. And auto coloring of the brushstroke. Oh yeah, so basically right now I'm using the same brushstroke all over the entire sphere, right? And there's no way for me to change. There are ways for me to change. Basically want the half sphere to be colored black, the lower to be colored white. Currently I had to use the vertex group and basically accessing the vertex group in geometry node, but that could be really labor intensive. And what I'm trying to do is basically using a UV map and also a texture for the sphere that's instancing it, and also get access to the color that's being used on the sphere to color the brushstroke. And currently there's no way to do that. Maybe in 3.0, but the data transfer node doesn't really work with instance. And if you dig into that, you know what I'm talking about, and it's pretty frustrating. So currently right now you can only color those in the basically one color, or maybe two or three if you're using vertex group. So yeah. And another thing, material flexibility. Oh, this is thing that I talked about, which is like if you want it to be a painting of something really metallic, you can just bump up the metallic in the material setting for the stroke. If you want it to be rough, then bump up the roughness and lower the specular. If you want it to be like shiny, then up the specular metalness, which is pretty nice. And it also adapts to the lighting pretty well, as you can see. There's basically no like other tweaks on light you have to do. Just light it as normal if you light a scene, Eevee. And I was thinking about using like a tune shader. You could actually do that, but I don't really see the point of it. But if you want to do, that's really easy. Oh, sorry. And yeah, so there's some additional stuff like how to render in cycle and camera calling and how did I do the tree, which is like the one here. I kind of wanted to put into a separate video. So this one's already super long. So let's see the tree. Let's disable the this one. Oh, let's go to this. So it is actually this tree that is using another geometry node to distribute those stuff to make it look like that. And this workflow, I'm probably gonna put it in the next video. Or if anyone wants to know, maybe nobody wants to know. And how rendering cycle. So in cycle, basically, what we are losing is the in the material setting, this show back face, because like the alpha blend and everything is only applied to Eevee, and in cycle, alpha is rendered basically just like transparent stuff. So there are gonna be like basically brushstrokes that are kind of intersecting, and it doesn't look very good in cycle, and also so I don't see really there's a point to use cycle for this. But if you really want some like, I guess just save you some work on lighting, use some reflections and stuff, that you could try to do it. It doesn't look that bad. I wonder if there is a cycle render that I did. I don't see it. Yeah, I didn't save it. but it looks all right, but somewhat janky. And camera culling. Camera culling, I'll put it in the next video. And also, there's some density along a single axis, which I actually use on this trunk. So this is a geometry node I made before. There's a density along the axis. Basically, you can adjust the density along a separate axis. Like we want to increase the x-axis or y-axis is used for like shapes that are just like strong, kind of slender, or it's not like a square or sphere. So basically, you have to increase the density along a certain axis for it to not have like hole when you're trying to cover it with stroke. And I can put that in the separate video as well. I guess I'll see you next time. Let me know if any questions. You can just in the comment section or probably find me on Twitter. I'll put my Twitter link down below as well. Thank you.